Uh, who's share the screen? Next. Okay. My title is about Qona'ah, about love, Qona'ah, and pride to the working woman. And during the pandemic, what made me even more concerned was not the virus, but the impact of this pandemic. Among them, increased cases of domestic violence, especially experienced by women. What it means is by domestic violence, it means is an act against women which result in psychological, sexual, psychological misery and neglect of the household, including a threat to commit acts, coercion with the household. And in addition, my concern is increase in physical or verbal violence against children during the pandemic by mothers. I got the data from KPII. The first physical violence carried out by mothers was pinching, then hitting, twisting the child ear, while psychologically. And 79% of the children admitted that they had been scolded and yelled at by their mother. So why mom? Or the question is, why mom? Is it that a mother who is supposed to be a protector of her child and be gentle actually becomes I'm sorry, I say like a tiger ready to punch on its prey. For several articles, it's stated that the violence perpetrated by the mother is caused by the role not only of dual roles, but multiple roles. At the same time, a mother becomes an office worker, a housewife, and a teacher at the same time during the pandemic, of course. Before the pandemic, it's already a problems. Working women have a lot of problems. Now during the pandemic, they are not dual role but multiple roles. At the same time, a mother becomes an office worker, a housewife, a teacher. At the same time, you can see the picture there. They are the mother doing multiple roles, and so we can say that psychology, the mother feels stress, mental and emotional burden is quite heavy. So it can be said that the mother is not happy. So why happiness? According to Argyle, happiness is a multi-dimensional construct compromising both emotional and cognitive elements. And the people who are experiencing the feeling, she will take care of if the mother happy, she will take care of the children with love and can deal with problems calmly. And therefore, many research results show that happiness can improve mental health and life satisfaction, and the performance of the mother at the office become better, will having a better performance. So what's can improve working mother. So this is why I'm thinking. I just love at the first variable because it was inspired by the increasing number of domestic violence prepared by husband on their wife, both physically and psychologically. So I'm wondering, where is the feeling of a man who loves his ex-lover? Where it goes? Did you know that when a woman feels love, she will able to give the man the power to solve everything. The result of the study show that the source of woman happiness is when she feels loved by a person who she loves. One love is gives if you give a woman one love, she gives extra love. abundance of love, and the love will be able to light up the whole house, I mean the family. So what is love? According to Sternberg, love is a collection of emotion and behavior characterized by intimacy, passion, and commitment. Okay. True happiness can be felt when someone loves and is lost by the person he loves in turn for the best feeling. According Heller and Hadler, true love only exists if someone is ready to give to his love to others and can have the influence on the happiness he feels. This is because if a person receives love not as expected from his partner, then the true love will not be created in the relationship, and the person will not feel happy. But if someone has received love as expected from his partner, then true love will be created by reciprocating the feeling of the love to the person who loves him, and will affect the person, and she will perceive happiness. So according to Dante, love can protect women from perceived negative pressure and consequences. Feeling love can make women feel more calm, cared for, which make individuals feel more confident, feel meaningful and stronger, so that it can make a mother work. It face emotional problems. She is not easily influenced, and focus on the problem, and more resilient and happier. So what is Qona'ah? There is still problem with the husband beating his wife, but based on my readings, my observation, that the husband will not hit unless he drinks alcohol or bad temper, except for the words the wife, which is sometimes very hurtful. But I know usually this is done by wife because she feels very depressed about the economic condition, or maybe she doesn't want to lose because of the competition. They won't look nicer, so she have to buy many things, so she would look great. This is competition between woman and woman. Yeah, so this pressure from the wife make the husband depressed. Based on a survey of domestic violence carried out because of economic problem, a household with a basic salary less than 7 million, based on violence happens. So based on Islamic psychology, happiness can only be felt for someone who is pious by following what Allah teaches, one of which is inculcating the nature of Qona'ah in living daily life. As Rasulullah SAW said, it's very lucky someone who converts to Islam. They get sufficient sustenance, and Allah bestow on him the nature of Qona'ah, of feeling enough and satisfied with the sustenance that Allah has given to him. Hari Muslim, from Hadith Muslim, the sustenance that Allah gives is not only in the form of material, but also be in the form of non-material. Thus, according to Islamic psychology, happiness is not only determined by worldly indicators. This is because happiness can also create it from the nature of Qona'ah that is implanted in daily life. Material is also one of the factors that affect happiness. When housewives ultimately choose to work, some of them are for reason of increasing household incomes. The increasing factor of violence during the COVID-19 pandemic carried out by mothers was also caused by economic factor. It is so complicated that a woman has to think about how to fulfill household needs properly. So so that she can live safely, comfortably, so she can feel happy. But the question is whether it's just ends there. What about the current condition that trains someone to be materialistic so that they are not happy enough by meeting primary uh, but also secondary needs, and sometimes even pursuing things are not needed. Sometimes humans will never feel that they have had enough, even though they have been able to meet their needs and even more than that, but they still feel unhappy. February research on the concept of Qona'ah, which creates a harmonious family from the perspective of the Quran as a solution in solving household problems, they are not harmonious, especially in terms of economic problem. The Qona'ah attitude is able to prevent oneself from mental disorder, but it can also foster the healthy, peaceful, and happy soul in dealing with all life's problems. For example, of wife's Qona'ah attitude is sincerely accept sustenance from her husband. As a wife, you should be grateful for what her husband has given to her and not demand her husband excessively for non-priority needs. Because there are many cases of men committing violence against their wives because of the woman words that hurts and underestimate the gifts of their husband. So who are never satisfied and always demand that their husband earn more. In the end, the wife felt more and more distant from feeling happiness. So we will have mental health even though we are in the state of deficiency or excess much because we have had enough. We feel we had enough. We feel enough because even though we are access rich, but if we still feel dissatisfied, it can have impact on greed, which will have impact to unhappiness also. So what's pride? And then why pride? Pride is the main indicator to create happiness in worker, according to Price Jones. Based on the result of previous research in state that someone who has feeling of pride tends to feel more happiness than those who do not have feeling of pride. According to Zhang, Kiyatama, and etc. And for a working mother who can work source of stress and happiness in general, the stress felt by a working mother can be caused by role conflicts, but they are happy when they are getting additional income for their family, and they are proud because they have a job. The search results show that one of the negative impacts of working mother is the high role conflict, while the positive impact is they can increase their pride. Increasing increasingly finding difficult to complete household tasks and office tasks, feeling proud and happy to be a worker mother because it's in the pandemic situation you can still earn income and feel more independent and feel that you can help and no bother your husband. From the result on the interview, it can be concluded that one of the women can survive. Pride is one of the reasons working mothers choose to continue to their role, but even multiple now, namely working while taking care of internal domestic problems, even though they are tired. Feeling of pride can also be felt by working mother in if their success and role as a working mother is recognized by surrounding environment as the success of working mother and recognizing by their work environment. The feeling of pride can create happiness in oneself because pride is made indicator of radic happiness according to the Press Jones based on the result previous research is taught that someone who has feeling of pride tends to feel more happiness than those who have don't feeling of pride. So, however, the problem is based on the result of the research. Pride has a dark side, namely emerging of feeling pride, or we can say ujuk, because it's fear that women feel high salary position, a high salary, have a high position, and it's the husband will feel as ideology feel they sometimes they are underestimate, yeah, because especially when women have a higher income and support their family. A woman with a relation, we don't sometimes they underestimate a man. So that's the bad sides of the what is it, pride, hubristic pride. They can trigger uh, arrogancy. So it can so it will the man feel will do the domestic violence because of that. So when the men do domestic violence, so at the end the woman feel unhappy. So then in the view of the Islamic religion on this, according to my understanding, if the Quran said, so what Islam say about the pride, the the Quran contains always about warning and prohibition. So usually there is a meaning content is in Al Quran. Don't walk arrogantly on the earth, because if we related result of the previous research before, that is true that feeling pride can cause people to be arrogant, because there is a negative impact of feeling pride, especially if a wife works. So um, uh, in the end, the woman will feeling not feeling the true happiness. So in addition, teaching of Islam that life is the goal to be happy is in the world here and after. So if a Muslim only intends his goal in the world, in worldly matters, that he will not will only get the world. So if the human intends to take Allah, ikhlas, because we're doing it for help husband to get the money, help the family, to fulfill the family. So if the wife ikhlas, he will get happiness in the world and in the hereafter. And I want to give some example here in authentic pride, yeah, especially authentic pride described to the researchers that is a positive pride. Interestingly, when we feel proud of our success, our self-concept will be increased because we get a prize from others. When we only hope in humans, then we can feel disappointment, because when they are not appreciate us as we expect. But if we do ikhlas for Allah, it will be okay. It's no prize from other people. It's okay. So and people around us will be more comfortable with us because we are stay humble, because we are ikhlas to do anything. I mean, ikhlas mean sincere. So we will feel the true happiness. In addition to the variables above, this study also includes demographic variables such as income, age, and number of children, because it's predict there is three factors can have influence of happiness on working mother. So the research question is, can love, Qona'ah, pride predict woman happiness? Do demographic factors, namely income, numbers of children, age, affect the happiness of working mother? Which of the variable, love, Qona'ah, or pride, have the most influence on happiness of working mother? Which pride is more felt by working mother, and how it's explained from Islamic point of view? So our research is distributing questionnaire via Google Doc. We determine several respondent criteria, and working mothers aged 20 until 60, and has a husband and children, Muslim, and domiciled in Jakarta, Bogor, and Tangerang. It's actually, I'm sorry, there's mistakes here. The sample is total is about 300 using sampling enduring non-probability sampling technique, accidental sampling method, validity test, using a confirmatory factor analysis, result 1.7. Dynamic analysis, multiple regression analysis method, and the measurement, as you see here, happiness using Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, OHQ, developed by Hills and Argel. Love measured using Steinberg, Qona'ah using Awaluddin Ahya, and Pride measured by Pride scale AHPS. So I want to tell this, when I'm trying to distributing this questionnaire, the most interesting happen is the questionnaire filled by 370 respondents only in 2 days. Usually in Indonesia, if we want to questionnaire filled, we very difficult to get respondent, but in this topic, only 2 days, 370 working women fill it. Yeah, I think seeing this, I become sure that this title was very attractive to the woman filling, so they volunteered to fill out the questionnaire. Even women who did not meet the criteria also fill. So it's about 70. It's not meet the criteria, so we drop it. However, because they did not meet, okay. Okay, the research results show that one of the negative impacts of working mother is the high role conflicts, while the positive impact that I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Findings. Okay. So based on the result of further hypothesis testing, which aims to the significance of each regression coefficient on the dependent variable, so happiness working mother, the results show that there are 4 variables significant: Qona'ah, love, Qona'ah, authentic pride, and hubristic pride give a significant impact to the happiness working mom. But demographic variable not give unsignificant impact. Then the best okay. So the conclusion is happy wife, happy life. So love brings happiness to working woman. Qona'ah attitude, there is glory and peace of mind, truly happiness with Qona'ah. Authentic pride and hubristic pride have an influence on the happiness of working mother, but however, contribution given to the happiness is small. Hubristic pride has the lower effect on happiness than authentic pride. It's also the same with the previous research. So, and the end conclusion is women must be careful enough about the feeling pride emotion. I will tell you, I will explain you later. So in the discussion, how to treat wife in Islam is recommendation for all the people under Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. In a household relation, there are certain ways to establish a harmonious relationship. A husband in the leader of the household to act a trigger for the happiness of the household itself. The way of communication and the treatment of husband to his wife can be an important point for family happiness as the happiness. So the husband attitude toward to his wife can reflect how deep the affection between the two of them and have each other. But not infrequently, husband does not understand how to treat his wife well. So the wife feels the husband has changed and doesn't love him anymore, and this will affect the feeling of being unhappy to the working mom. Then what about authentic pride? uh yes. Mm, eh, okay, I will explain about pride first. Yeah, about authentic pride based on the research about it's explained that authentic pride have I already explained have a positive effect. Pride is positive emotion that naturally a person feels proud when he success in doing something. However, in the view of Islam, human will lose everything if it is only think about to fulfill worldly needs. According to Umar bin Khattab said, I heard the messengers of Allah says that charity depends on the intention, and for each person the reward is according to what he's intended. So then what about the authentic life based on the research about is also explained have a positive effect, but I think we can change the direction. I mean, however, even it's positive, we feel positive, it's naturally, but okay, but we have to not really concerned to that feeling because it will feel. I'm afraid it will feel a change that a feeling to be ujub, so narcissistic. So I think why don't we change the direction to why we the the purpose of we are doing something with ikhlas, soil would be happily I mean we can get the true happiness. So for the suggestion, uh, based on the result, uh, happiness give the effect about 20% to the I'm sorry, love give effect on happiness about 20%. So the husband needs to know to show his love. This is my suggestion. Husband need to know to show his love for his wife. As Rasulullah gave an example of behavior toward his wife, including asking her wife opinion, being gentle, even when she's angry, helping the wife works calmly, wife feelings, be patient, not being rude and yelling, asking for the wife fulfilling, and etc. And for yeah, I think the government this is the example of the picture, yeah, how the Nabi Muhammad SAW also helping his wife. So the suggestion also government providing education by making program how to make couples love their partners is very important. And next, so as we can as a wife we can do practicing Qona'ah. I mean try to enough to feel enough for everything that we got, and what be thankful for what we everything eating, or uh, our clothes, and everything. We can make it simpler, so and if we practicing enough not to buy many things, so the money we can also give for the charity, and it will make the happiness feel more deep in your heart. Because buying things is, you can feel happy with buying many things, but just in a temporary feeling. Happiness is all temporary, but if you can give, if you give a charity and your money for doing good things to other people, the feeling happy is will be more last longer. And I think we need to do a Qona'ah campaign to the woman, and to teach Qona'ah also to the children, and teaching to the children how to act Qona'ah. So, and the end, directing authentic hubristic pride emotion. So I think we have to, the woman who better to direct their feeling about it. Okay, next. Today. Okay, I think enough for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Have the slides for utilizing and Islamic conceptualization of pregnancy loss in the treatment of 2 Muslim women during the COVID-19 pandemic by Dr. Venus Mahmoodi and Hania Mortada. Dr. Venus Mahmoodi is an assistant professor of medical psychology in the women's program at Columbia University Medical Center. Her clinical practice and research focuses on perinatal mental health, fertility, and loss in Muslim women. So please give a round of applause to.
Switch.
Yeah.
Can I make it full screen or?
It's way too full screen. Let's see. I think we should probably like that.
Sorry?
I think we may have to just leave it like that for the meantime.
Can you just put the notes right down?
Oh.
Just like some notes.
Definitely. Yeah, we just check. I can sit here if you want.
No, I got it. I got it. Yeah. Oh, we have to go to try to make it a slideshow. Yeah. It doesn't work. Okay. All right.
You can present.
Sorry?
You can hold the mic.
I can hold them.
Yeah.
Can we put them on? All right. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. So I guess the online folks to see me, or I don't know. I've been teaching hybrid for the past year, and I have to say it's been a nightmare, like a total nightmare. So I'm excited to see how this is going to work. But it is exciting to see that there's people from all over the world connected with us. But I'm telling you, it's been a nightmare. Hania Murtada is not able to make it to the conference, so I'll be presenting the case exclusively. But so essentially, I'm going to be talking about just one case and talking about how Islamic spirituality and conceptualization of motherhood was used in a perinatal loss case. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about perinatal loss, what it is, pregnancy loss specifically. We're going to talk about grief and bereavement, then switch over to spirituality and bereavement. From there, we're going to talk about the case. You'll hear about the presenting problem, her history, and then the family dynamics, because for this patient in particular, family dynamics were really important. And then finally, we're going to talk about the treatment, the part that's actually going to be the most interesting part. We'll talk about the grief aspects of a conventional grief treatment, and then also how we incorporated Islamic spirituality, Islamic rites, and conceptualizations. So just to give you a little bit of a background, pregnancy loss can be either categorized as a miscarriage or as a stillbirth. And miscarriage is essentially when it occurs before 20 weeks of gestation, and a stillbirth is when it occurs after 20 weeks of gestation or during labor. So if the fetus dies anywhere from 20 weeks to birth. About 15 to 27% of women between the ages of 25 to 29 experience miscarriages. One miscarriage is pretty typical. About 20% of women experience them, but it's often seen as something very traumatic and difficult and challenging because it's something that we don't really talk about, right? Nobody talks about that a lot of pregnancies can result in miscarriage. If it's a recurrent miscarriage where it's 2, 3, 4 in a row, that's something altogether different. That's when you need people to see their OBs and possibly fertility specialists to assess what's happening. But generally about 80%, we have no idea why there's a miscarriage. And predominantly it's because, there might be like a genetic abnormality or something, but because, you lose the products of conception, you really can't test to see what happened. Whereas with the older, even with the older, like the older fetuses, we really don't have a good sense of what's happening and why there is a loss. And in multiple cases that I've seen over the course of this year, we really didn't know. And for one, we did know that it was hospital negligence, which is like one of the most painful things. But for the majority of them, sometimes people just don't know. And there's a lot of testing that happens, but we really don't know what's happening. In older women, so those who are 45 and older, you're gonna see that there's a much, much higher risk of miscarriage. And then 1% of pregnancies result in stillbirth. So grief and bereavement. So what does the process look like, right? So grief are the symptoms and actually the response that somebody has when they experience a loss. And it can be any kind of a loss. It doesn't have to be a death. It can be losing a job. It could be, during COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, we all experienced losses. Things that we wanted to happen that didn't, things that we wanted to do that we couldn't. So loss, grief is going to be associated with any kind of a loss. And specifically looking at bereavement, that's the period in which someone experiences their grief. What's interesting is that people don't understand how long it takes to move through a grief experience. So, when somebody dies, a lot of people don't know. And, I have a patient who has long haul COVID symptoms still 2 years later. And she's like, after a week, people get bored. People just get bored after a week. They don't want to hear it anymore. And with grief, it is the symptoms peak at 6 months. And when symptoms peak at 6 months, that means that you gotta be there day in, day out, up to that 6 months so that they can hit their peak and then slowly come back down again. And you know, I had a patient where her mother died right when she found out she was pregnant. And we did not talk about her pregnancy. We did not talk about her baby. We did not talk about it except for her mother. Every single day for the entirety of her pregnancy. On the last day, which was 2 days before her scheduled C-section, she's like, maybe I have to talk about this baby of mine. I'm like, if you want to. But she needed to process her mother's death so she could prepare herself for her baby's arrival. Generally, what we see in terms of symptoms, right? If you look at that list, it looks very similar to depression, right? A lot of similar symptoms as depression, right? That low mood, anxiety, sadness, changes in appetite and sleep, and then functional impairments. People just don't want to get out of bed. It's painful. There's a physical pain to grief. And you know, a lot of times, oh, I'm depressed. No, you're not depressed, you're grieving. So we want to provide psychoeducation to patients. Like, no, this is what happens when you grieve. And then we notice that there's all these different domains are affected: cognitive, emotional, functional, and then spiritual, right? Spiritual functioning changes. So there's several theories that are associated with bereavement and how we can work with patients within a, within a theoretical construct, like if they're coming into therapy. And I've used all three of these models: the continuing bonds model, the dual process, and the constructivist. And you know, I'll talk a little bit more about the continuing bonds, but the dual process is generally this recovery grief model where they're kind of oscillating back and forth between recovery, feeling okay, and feeling not okay. And the way that we like to conceptualize it, it's like you're sitting there, there's a huge wave that comes over you, you feel like you're drowning, you're feeling awful, and then the wave recedes and you're okay. And they're like, I was okay last week, what happened? Like, it's normal. It's normal. It comes over you, you feel like you're drowning, life is horrible, and then it recedes and everything's okay. And that's something that we see typically happen throughout the 6 to 12 months that they're experiencing this. The constructivist model is just creating a new normal. You've lost your baby, now you got to figure out, how do I keep going? And with respect to continuing bonds, this one I thought was like one of the most interesting because it really, there's this, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the DABDA model, right? What is it? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, right? And that doesn't work with the perinatal population. It doesn't work with people who are pregnant and postpartum, who experience loss. Because the word acceptance really feels, it feels very invalidating. And so we don't like to use kind of that model. We like to use this understanding of like, you're gonna continue the connection, continue the love, continue building the relationship with the deceased. And you can use it with anybody, right? You can use it with a baby, you can use it with a parent, you can use it with anybody that somebody loses. So it really builds love in absence. It builds love and connection after the person has died. So this has been one of the most profound, let me backtrack. So I was trained by someone who was a fellow in the Death and Dying Society. And that just sounds like such a dramatic, thing to be a part of. But you could just look at her. She wasn't Muslim, but she was like a Sufi. And she would just have this very interesting aura about her where she would always like walk in and she would always talk about moving through. I didn't know where she got this from. And then finally I found this couple lines from Robert Frost's poem, A Servant to Servants, where he says, the best way out is always through, and I agree to that, or insofar as that I can see no way out but through. Right, so you have all these different barriers on your sides. And the only way out is if you're walking through muddy, mucky, gross mud. And that's how I conceptualize it for my patients. You take a step and it's stuck, but you got to pull it up and you got to take a step forward. And that's how you incrementally move towards the light. Imagery is really great with patients. They love it. So generally we ask people to tell us their reproductive story. Tell me about your story. Tell me what you expected. How many children did you want? When did you expect to get pregnant? What did you hoped would happen? We want to know the whole story. Sometimes people want to have babies when they're babies. They're like little, sometimes people are just trying to, when they're little kids, they're like playing mommy and daddy, right? They're like really excited to do that. And then sometimes it's all the way, right when they get married, that's when they start thinking about children. So we want to ask people their reproductive story. Next, we want people to share information. Most people in society don't want to hear about dead babies. You're all here, so I'm assuming you want to hear about dead babies. But most people don't want to hear about a dead baby. It's so depressing. But this work is really lovely, and people will tell you their baby's name. They'll tell you what their hopes and dreams were for the baby. They will show you pictures. I once saw the most beautiful picture of a baby boy that had died. Beautiful picture. It's like, look at his lips. He goes, yeah, you see his lips? Aren't they beautiful? I'm like, they're gorgeous. He's gorgeous. And it makes parents feel so good when you're able to give them that moment. Yeah, let them tell their story as many times as they want. And then attuned listening, really listen to what's happening, because most people can't handle it. Most family members can't handle it. And then in terms of like receiving support from other people, instrumental support can be helpful, right? Going and cleaning or taking care of other children, or something that's more kind of a labor, right? An act of labor. So there are some factors that influence bereavement, like how long someone might engage in kind of this mourning period. The first is this cultural, religious, and spiritual norms. And I'm not necessarily talking about that this is what Islam says, but this is what people kind of impart on us. Like, this is what's okay, this is what's not okay. So what is okay to be grieved? What can you grieve, right? Is it okay to grieve the loss of a fetus, right? Society will determine that. How much time is appropriate for grieving? How long can you be sad? How long can you think about the loss of your baby? What does appropriate grief look like? Can you cry? Do you have to look stoic? Like, what is it that's okay? The other thing is social support. So if there's positive perceived social support where someone feels really supported and cared for, they usually move through their grief pretty well. But if there isn't that supportive environment, it can be really tough. And then, who's going to be providing instrumental support and who's going to provide emotional support? And then some personality traits, right? Neuroticism is a big one. If someone's really neurotic just in general, it's going to be a lot harder for them because they expected something to happen and it didn't happen. So they're going to be in a lot more distress. People who feel like they lost their self-efficacy, their sense of having control in their life. And then self-doubt. Control is a big one, right? Control is a big one. And in our case, we'll talk a lot about control. Complicated grief is when kind of this normative, typical grief that we talk about that takes about a year to move through kind of isn't getting resolved. So after a year, they're still crying like it happened yesterday. I have a patient currently, she's 63 years old. When she was 40, her baby died. Nobody acknowledged it, nobody talked about it. They quickly got her to doing IVF again and she had a baby right after. 5 minutes, oh, okay. I'm gonna go quickly then. So once she told me about it, I was like, wow, you lost your baby. What was that like for you? The first person ever to actually give her space to talk about it. It was profound. It was remarkable. It like really made a difference. It actually stopped her panic attacks. It was profound. Disenfranchised grief is when parents are not able, when somebody determines that the grief that you're experiencing is not legitimate. And perinatal grief is one of those, especially early miscarriages. Go have another, not a big deal, try again. So it increases the risk of having the complicated grief. So with Muslims, we don't have a lot of data. We essentially, there's a lot of silencing that happens, so we can't there isn't really We know that integrating spirituality is helpful, but we really don't have a lot of data on it. So as far as the case studies, I had 5 perinatal loss cases that came in during the COVID-19 pandemic. And 2 of them were stillbirths at the time of birth. 2 of them were mid-pregnancy, and 1 was early in pregnancy. And saw them during the COVID pandemic, and we consulted with a lot of different scholars to get a sense of what's going on. And we're going to focus on Maryam. This is a pseudonym, just FYI. So she's a 31-year-old Muslim Arab woman living in a West Coast city with her husband and 2-year-old son. She experienced a full-term stillbirth. And during the peak of COVID-19 pandemic, she experienced tearfulness, anger, sadness, a sense of worthlessness, diminished functioning. There's no history of like psychiatric diagnoses, but she did have a lot of anxiety. She was the youngest of 4. She was the only girl, and the family always protected her. So she noticed that the baby's movements had diminished over the course of like a couple days. She ended up going into to her OB. She was supposed to get scheduled for a non-stress test. A lot of chaos because of COVID-19, right? Don't bring your husband, you have to do this by yourself. And there was a lot of miscommunication and things got delayed. And she thought she was supposed to come in on Monday, but she should have gone in right away. The OB didn't sound like a very nice person, to be honest. At the time of the appointment, they confirmed the baby's death, and she was induced labor. She spent some, and she had the baby. Her husband came, they spent some time with the baby, and then they were able to, the baby was released to them. So because it was after 120 days of gestation, which is when the soul enters the body, they named the baby, giving him the pseudonym Abdullah. He was washed according to Islamic law, enshrouded, buried. There was a lot of drama around the burial site. The mother-in-law kind of wanted to take the baby, and like she took the baby, was like hugging it and kissing it, and she was just looking at her mother-in-law, what are you doing? It was very difficult and traumatic for her. Mothers-in-law can be really tough in the perinatal period. Many periods, but in the perinatal period particularly. COVID-19 exacerbated the situation because she wasn't able to bring her husband to appointments. She really had to make a lot of life and death decisions by herself and was kind of confronted with this. And she's someone who's already anxious, and it was really hard for her to do that. She really struggled to advocate for herself because the restrictions made it really hard. Can I have like 5 more minutes? Because like, okay, because I mean, I'm not even getting to okay. So she wasn't able to go to her OB as often as she needed to get checked. And she wasn't advocating for herself. And this OB was really horrible. She's like, well, you should have, come in. She's like, well, you told me not to. It was really, really horrible. It was horrible. It was horrible. I had another patient who, alhamdulillah, she had a live baby, but they told her like, you have to just stay at home. Only come in when you absolutely have to. Yeah. So the number of stillbirths increased significantly during the pandemic, specifically because people were afraid to go into the hospital. It's devastating. A lot of isolation, a lot of just being alone. So as far as grief therapy, we provided a lot of psychoeducation, talked about the wave, right? We talked about we did a lot of holding, letting them talk, holding the emotions with them, being able to assess her for helplessness, because she would feel really helpless a lot of the time. But what I'd like to do is go here. She felt a really strong obligation to care for her child, really strong. She had a child, right, who's alive. But for this baby, she felt personally responsible for his death. She was like, I should have done something. And she believed that it was Allah's will. She believed that it was God's will that this baby died. But she's like, I should have done more. It was my responsibility. I'm like, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. The OB should have done more, but you know that his life was not meant to be on this earth. And we have to internalize this. And sometimes I sound like a broken record. I say the same thing over and over and over. And it's so annoying, but you have to keep saying it until people are able to take it in. Then she got pregnant again. And that pregnancy was actually this pregnancy, she's still pregnant. is really, really helpful because she's able to advocate for herself and she's able to speak up. And, and she actually, the OB that's currently caring for her, told her the story of what happened to her son. What had happened is that the umbilical cord, as he turned, right? So babies towards the end of the pregnancy turn downwards. And when he turned and he went down into the birth canal, he crushed his umbilical cord with his shoulder. And he ended up dying that way. So it was nobody's fault, right? It was nobody's fault. It was not her fault. And that was really helpful for her to know. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Just a freak accident. I mean, Allah's will, but you know what I mean. So we understood, like we started talking about this is Allah's will, and it's okay to be sad. And it's okay to go through to mourn the loss. You can be sad, just because that's what the Prophet ﷺ did, right? When his son was dying, when his son died, he took care of it, he cried, right? And he accepted Allah's will. And that's what we instill in these women. Right? And then we provided them, and then what's really helpful is when we tell them that, baby's gonna be with Ibrahim alayhi salam. Baby's gonna be hanging out with other babies, having a good time. And the day that, you're ready to join, baby's gonna pull you up and you're gonna hang out and you have a good time. And your whole family's gonna be reunited. It's gonna be so lovely. And then we cry together. So one of the things that the themes, and this will be my last slide, I promise. One of the most important themes that emerge is this identity of Muslim motherhood, Muslim mother. Because what women do is they have a very particular expectation of what they want their mothering to look like. And sometimes we have to integrate, like, well, here are the requirements that Allah has put on you. Here's what you have to do in accordance to Allah's will. And here's what you can do, what you can embellish with, you can add. And so, it was really trying to reconceptualize and shift the way she thought about Allah's protection, her family's protection, and her protection of her child. And that was really helpful because she ended up being able to manage that. So, yeah, integrating Islamic concepts is highly effective. It's really, the patients need it. And sometimes they're angry at God, and we can kind of manage and help with kind of shifting that, because it's usually not at Allah, it's usually at themselves or another person. At one of my patients, it was at IVF. She was angry at IVF, right? Creating realistic expectations of themselves, and then rebuilding their relationship with Allah, which generally can be extremely helpful. And thank you, that is it. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum, everybody. Thank you to both of our speakers for those just enlightening discussions. The first one talking about love and pride and the impact that has on the working mom. And then the second about just really talking about loss of a child and how do we foster healing for those who've experienced that by integrating Islamic principles and frameworks. So we do have some questions. I'll start with the questions from the audience. If you do have questions in the room, feel free to write it on the note cards that have been provided to you and raise your hand, and our volunteers will pick it up. And then if you have questions online, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll record those as well. And then of course I have some questions for both presenters if there haven't been any, there aren't any others that come in. So I'll start with the first question, which was for our first presenter, Dr. Liany. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. I hope you're still there. The first question came from our Zoom audience. It was, can you shed light on how hubristic pride correlates with higher satisfaction? I'll repeat that again, and again, I hope you're still there. Can you shed light on how hubristic pride correlates with higher satisfaction?
Yes, I'm still here.
Wonderful. Do you need me to repeat the question? I can.
Yes, I got the answer.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead.
I got the answer. Okay. I think because hubristic pride, they will if they need. This is because the intention of the people who have a hubristic pride is how the people see them, see or they are great. So if they can achieve their what they want to achieve and they can get it, they can succeed, and they will feel great and they will feel very satisfied. But if he has not succeed, he will feel anxious, frustrated, and sometimes they are doing violence or aggressive. That's what I'm from the literature. I get that point.
Right.
I hope it can answer the question.
Yeah, I do want to clarify, to ask a clarification. The hubristic pride is the type of pride that comes from only pride in the self, right? Correct? As opposed to not
Yes.
Allah. So this idea of, you know, it being contingent only on what's basically being given, what you're, the sort of human self, right? So if what I'm hearing you say is like, if that's not coming through, then there is going to be lower satisfaction because there's not pride connected to this higher power of Allah. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we have two questions for our second presenter. The first question is, how do we address barriers between the culture versus religion? I assume when it comes to this grieving process.
So this is what my research is focused on, is trying to differentiate between culture and religion, because there's a lot of the expectations that mothers have of themselves are connected to kind of country of origin of values rather than actual Sharia. And so that's one of the things we're trying to gather, a lot of the different rulings, a lot of, finding them. My ultimate goal is to first find all the minimums, which I'm getting very, very close to putting together a publication. And then once we find the minimums of what is actually like required of mothers, then we can kind of add to that. So yes, there's very distinct differences between what culture, like country of origin values say versus Islam. It's a very big difference. So we're working on that.
And then just a follow-up for clarification. So then in terms of the grieving process, do you see the ways in which it intersects? Like it can conflict or it enhances their grieving? How do you bring culture in when that's also part of what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean the way it can be really helpful, because a lot of there's a lot of cultural rituals around grief and supporting, but it's also kind of understanding because a lot of people are like, I can't cry, I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not, like, it's like, no, let's mercy, right? First and foremost, mercy. Let's bring the mercy into the conversation. But there can be a really strong intersection between the two, but it's a matter of finding the balance, which I find like the balance is the most important piece, right? That you take aspects of culture that are helpful and then combine that with your religious beliefs, and I think it can be really supportive.
Thank you. So we're just going to keep Mike switching, because these next few questions are for you as well. The question says, as a doctor in training, I wonder how or where to get the right tools and knowledge to implement these fundamental concepts with my patients. I feel unqualified to discuss Islam.
I did too for a very long time. But this is where you have to really strengthen your knowledge of Islam and really go out and study just generally. I take a class with on the Ghazali regularly and kind of begin integrating that. Being in touch with specific scholars who focus on the work that you do. There's a mufti that I'm always bugging him, asking him questions. And so making sure you find people that, there's a lot of supportive people out there who are willing to help you understand, but really strengthening your own knowledge of Islam is really important.
I think that's really helpful, both as the clinician trying to support, like being Muslim and bringing being Muslim in that space and recognizing that is a value that's needed.
Yeah.
So inform, like telling us to inform ourselves, but also building those very important partnerships about knowing where's our lane, right? Like
Absolutely.
recognizing that these are the ways in which we can lean into community to enhance our practice.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very
Beautiful.
quite a few questions. We'll get as far as we can with them. This is another question for you. Have you had experience working with female clients who had a child loss in the past, many years of age? And let me keep reading it, I'll see if I'll clarify. And what process was helpful to reopen that process? Many discuss it or use cognition to shield from their grief. So I guess the question, I think you might have even addressed this, having grief in the past, and then how do you work with them to process that?
I mean, the most important thing is that most patients, you know, when you do an intake, you start gathering that information and you ask them. And with women, you know, you ask all. I'm a reproductive psychologist, so I ask all of the questions about pregnancy and postpartum, and how many pregnancies they've had, how many, you know, live children they've had. And, you know, even, you know, with this woman who's in her 60s, she developed panic attacks after her baby's loss, and she continued struggling with panic attacks. And so we started treating the panic attacks, and one day, you know, she just brought up, you know, the story, and we started exploring the story, talking about it, and then kind of uncovering and seeing what is complicated grief, what is actually panic attacks, and what is depression. And we realized that it was complicated grief, most of it. So it's a matter of like opening up the opportunity for people just to talk. And once they start talking, stuff comes out. And sometimes patients won't share really kind of salient details. And like I have a patient who donated eggs to have her children, and she didn't share that with me until 2 years after we started working together. You know, so people feel a lot of shame around the experiences they've had until they really build that strong trust.
All right, I'm going to ask another question from the audience, and then the next one will be one that came from Zoom. This question says, thank you for speaking on this topic and with such grace in doing this work. The question was, I saw on a slide that I wanted to confirm, does holding your deceased baby decrease symptoms of PTSD? Why is this?
So unknowns are like the most challenging thing that you could experience in your life. And I think all of us with the pandemic have experienced like what unknowns are like. And anytime someone struggles with unknowns, I'm like, think about the pandemic. Think about, you know, when in New York City, we thought it was gonna be 3 weeks, you know, March 2020. It's like, hey, you know, we're the first ones to experience, we're like, oh, 3 weeks, everything is gonna get better, right? Here we are, 2 years later. And so with respect to, there's a lot of trauma that's involved with of loss. And I can tell you, I won't tell you, but I can tell you stories of when people experience the actual expelling of the fetus and how incredibly traumatizing that is. Because, you know, a full-term baby looks like a baby, right? A full-term fetus looks like a baby, but, you know, 16 weeks, 18 weeks, it does not look very nice. It does not look very nice. And so when people look at it, it can be traumatic. But once you kind of spend time and you're holding it and you kind of see it as your baby, it can be really helpful and supportive. But for some people, not, right? Not everybody's going to feel like, oh, this is so lovely, I'm holding my dead baby here. But there are people who find it really comforting that, okay, here it is, you know, I'm holding my baby, and kind of being able to bond even though the baby's not alive.
Thank you. So this question comes from our Zoom audience. In medical school, we are taught to never say grieving things to a person. What is your view on this phrasing, saying things like, this is God's will for Muslims? I think that was the question. Do we need to clarify?
Yeah, it's a question about not saying was God's will. Oh, I never say it's God's will and you must accept, yeah. Right? We don't say that. That's invalidating. What we say is that we understand, like, the underlying concept here is that as Muslims, we believe that it's Allah's will, right? We believe that. We're not sitting going, it's Allah's will, you better accept, right? And so we're trying to figure out how to allow someone to believe, I believe this is Allah's will, and I can be sad and I'm going through my grief and I'm struggling and this is not easy. And so trying to find that balance between, someone will say superficially, I accept that this is Allah's will, and they still are angry and they're still sad. So we work with that. And while they are moving through their grief and dealing with the anger and dealing with the sadness, they're, as that improves, their acceptance of Allah's will increases as well. So we're talking specifically within the context of someone's belief, that they believe that this is Allah's will. We're not talking about bringing it into the space and saying, you must accept this because it's Allah's will. That's invalidating and not helpful. And that's what the majority of people do in oh, just accept it, go have another one. It's not a big deal. So is that clear? I don't know if that clarifies.
I hope it does. And if you are the person joining us virtually who asks that question and you would like further clarification, please do put it in the chat and we'll try to get to it after we get to the other questions. This next question comes from our audience. Are there ways to make perinatal care more accessible and accommodating to Muslims? So what thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, there's not a lot of us doing this work. So, get trained in we want people to get trained in perinatal mental health. There are, Postpartum Support International provides a lot of trainings. There's a lot of trainings here, not here, this is Connecticut, but in New York City, we have a lot of different opportunities to get trained in maternal mental health or perinatal mental health. And so once I got trained fully in perinatal mental health, that's when I kind of started looking into the Islamic part of it and how that can be integrated. So get trained in whatever you can get trained, and then kind of adding the Islamic portion can be helpful. Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. I mean, cultural competence in the people who are already practicing is important. A lot of people reach out and ask for additional support if they're seeing a Muslim patient. We do a lot of talks around the city to disseminate, how to work with Muslims. So, but I'm just one person, so we need more people who are in the field.
So I would normally just say to wrap up, but I think this question is really important. So 30 seconds.
Okay.
No, it's not you, it's me. I actually had to push to ask this question. This comes from the audience. For many of us who come from colonized lands and forgotten or lost our traditions, how would creating new traditions work? Any experience with that? We have very short on time.
Well, for a lot of people who don't have a faith background, that's what we do. We're like, what rituals do you want to create? What rituals do you want to instill? And if, we're Muslim, of course, we want to do it within, the scope of Tawheed and making sure that we're not going against Islam, but you can create rituals. So, this woman, her baby turned 1. And so I said, what do you want to do? And so she sat down and she thought about it, and she actually had a birthday party with just herself and her husband and their 2-year-old son, and had a birthday party for their baby who's not alive. Nobody else was invited, only supportive people. And that's something she decided that she wanted to do because it helped her through her grief. So you can create rituals, of course, as long as it's within the scope of your belief system.
Thank you to both of our presenters for these enlightening topics. And thank you all to our audience and those virtually for your great questions. We are going to head into our next session, which will be in this room, Harkness. And so we'll start that promptly at 11. I do want to say, if you have questions for presenters, everything's on the app. So try to, reach them through the app. I believe contact information is there as well. So we highly encourage you to engage there in that space. Thank you again, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for letting me ask that question. I was like, it's really important.